Hello, welcome to the Vidpal.net Startup and Travel Webinar Series. I'm Emelina Monero, Vidpal's Social Media Manager, and we are a global real-time video marketplace for the average traveler. Tonight we are going to be talking with Mike Schein, the founder of Michael Schein Communications, also an Inc. magazine columnist and an expert on content marketing. So Michael, can you tell me a little bit, what is content marketing, and is it necessary for startups and businesses?
Sure. So first of all, thanks for having me.
Mhm.
It's great to be here. And just so you know, a little side note, we are Michael Schein Communications right now, and we have been for a long time, but we're actually changing our name in the next couple of weeks to Microfame Media. So if anyone out there sees that shift, you'll see what that's about.
Okay.
And what is content marketing? It's a term that's really become a bit of a buzz phrase lately, and it can mean a lot of things, but you'll sometimes hear it used interchangeably with inbound marketing. And essentially what it means is that the internet really runs on content, because in the past you essentially were at the mercy of salespeople. There was very limited information out there, right? So if you wanted to buy something, you needed to see an advertisement, or there was a knock at the door, or whatever it might be, and they had the monopoly on the information. You saw it, you made a decision. Today, the first thing most people do, especially if it's a sizable purchase that's not a pack of gum or a bar of soap, is that people go online and they do research, and they don't like to be sold to online. So the paradigm has really changed. So what a lot of companies that are very successful at marketing themselves online are doing is they're positioning themselves as experts. So they create media that's entertaining and informative in its own right, not just as a sales pitch.
Mhm.
And in doing so, they become the go-to person around a certain topic. And then what happens is people will buy from them when a need arises. And the other piece of that is that Google likes content. So if you're creating really great blog posts or podcast episodes or YouTube clips that really have true value, and they're getting better and better at knowing what true value is, it's a good thing for ranking high. And the second part of the question was, is it good for every business? Or
Yeah, is it necessary for startups and more so small businesses?
like anything else, I think it depends. I mean, I'm certainly biased toward it, but that being said, there are companies out there that do things the old-fashioned way. I mean, so to give you an example, one of our clients is and was a very successful business. They're a client called Interiors by Stephen G. They're the largest interior design company in Florida. And they did great in the way they marketed. They marketed through word of mouth, they marketed through brokers, all that. But the limitation was, and they could have gone on like that forever, but the limitation was they couldn't get outside of Florida. They did jobs outside of Florida, but no one knew who they were. Whereas in Florida, the owner is almost a mini celebrity. And the other thing was that their competition, that are much smaller than them and much less prominent, were completely outranking them on the web. So you looked up Miami interior designer, and their company was nowhere to be found. So as an ambitious company, they wanted to remedy that. But were they doing okay without it? Yeah. Now there's other companies that can't survive without content.
What inspired you to create your company?
It's funny. I I've always been a writer. I was kind of an artsy kid, you know. Um, and my first internship slash low level job out of college was at this company called Spin the Bottle Productions that produced pop up video. If you remember that show, or if
Mm-hmm.
anyone remembers that, I ran videos. I got to do a little bit of writing. It was cool. But one thing led to another, and I did some marketing stuff, and then I went into the family business for a few years when I didn't know what else I was doing, and that didn't work very well at all, so I left. But I had some experience in telecommunications and call centers, which is where I met John, who's an owner of Vidpal. And I was in that world, and I did well, and I had an aptitude for marketing and went into that. But it's something, after a while, I felt I was veering off course. So to make a very long story short, I left and decided I would live kind of poor for a while, and I became a freelance copywriter, and I did okay at that. But it's tough being a copywriter because it's all project based, and you work really, really hard. And when you're working, you're not selling, and when you're selling, you're not working. Although it's all work, and it's kind of nutty. And so, what happened was I had this one client who hired me as a consultant, and I was like, okay, cool, I'll do that, And they flew me to England, and they had hired a branding company because they, wanted to get online, and they were being outcompeted, and they were my only client who I was doing offline copywriting for, trade show stuff. I was doing almost all online copywriting just because that's where the work was. And when I got there, the first thing I found out was the branding company they hired was basically a web design firm. And they asked me and what I thought, and when they left, and I said, well, I think you're going to have a really beautiful website. And I did. But I said, you said that the whole reason you're doing this is because you're not driving business successfully offline, and you need to drive it online. What are you or they going to do to make that happen? And they said, what do you mean? And I said, well, your Google runs on content. You need to produce a whole lot of blog posts and this and that. At the time, it was really about blogging, and it's got to be done the right way, and you've got to get it shared by influencers. And they said, well, we don't have the time for all that. So instead of complaining about my client, which I normally would have done, I realized they don't have the time because they don't have the know-how. It's a bunch of engineers being greeted by a blank page, even though they could write a little bit. And they also had a lot of other priorities. So what I said to them was, look, and they had like 2 people in the marketing department. So I said, let me talk to everybody on your staff. I'll find out what they're good at, what they know, what they don't know, and I'll create blueprints for you. Because I know there are certain headline types that work. There are certain structures of a piece because we respond to the same storytelling structures time and time again, and the details change. And I said, what I'll do is I'll create I'll create customized blueprints. Everyone will contribute 1 blog post a month because there's 32 people here. And the combined result, it'll take everybody an hour a month. You'll know exactly what to do. And the combined result will be a big splash. And then I'll go out and get it shared. And I did that, and it was a big smash hit. And I said, wow, I think there's a business in this, because there were so many companies that wanted to do this, but they didn't have the structure, and it was overwhelming, and they would always drop the ball. So I created a process called content casting, which was specifically about letting companies use the resources they had to do this in an efficient way. And the rest was history. It worked out well. So
That's really smart, content casting.
thank you.
Yeah. So I read one of your articles. What was it titled? It was titled, I forget what it was titled, but it was about how following your bliss is not necessarily the best advice. And it talked about how following your expertise is better for, like, career-wise. And so for you personally, content marketing, or specifically writing, is that like your expertise, your passion, or a combination of the two?
Yeah, I think that concept of passion is a little bit tricky because, I think a lot of people, especially in this day and age, not to be the old fogey, in this day and age, it was my generation too, think that if they're not, if they're going to play sports, they need to be in the NBA, and if they're going to be in Hollywood, they need to be, if they're going to write, they need to be Steven Spielberg's not a writer. I don't know, name your screenwriter, right? But the truth is, instead of bashing your head against the front door, sometimes if you find side doors where what you like to do intersects with the market, you get to where you want it to be anyway. So, to give you an example, I tried to be in a band when I was young, and it was a lot of fun, but it fell apart, as these things do. But our songs were very theatrical, and we had a guy in the music industry tell us that they would have made a good musical. So I had an idea in my head for a musical, and I'm 37. I think the first song was written in 1998. I mean, I don't know. So I have this business now, and I have an engine for creativity. And I was in a Barnes and Noble in New York, and again, to make a long story short, I happened to start a conversation with someone who's a legitimate creative director and director. And now she heard the songs from all the way back then and heard the idea, and we're creating a interactive musical. Now we're using our marketing methods and everything we've learned in the business to fuel that. But that's something I never could have even, if all my financial well-being was dependent on that project, I couldn't take a small bet with it the way I'm doing now and test the waters and see if it expands. But there's something, the market does have something to say. A lot of people who are pursuing their dreams at all costs and they're going to settle for nothing less than making a living at it, sometimes it's not a zero-sum game. I mean, sometimes they end up in a really bad situation. So, but I think you can't hate what you do. I hated what I did for a long time. It's a really terrible way to live, and I don't think you're as good at it. So, I think it's a complicated issue.
And then before you said how, when you're talking with your first client, how blogging was the big tool then. So how has content marketing evolved, and what are the other focuses outside of blogging?
That's a great question. There are a lot of blogs out there right now. I mean, 5 years ago, you could really get a foothold. Now, yeah, it's still an effective tool in the right context, but just throwing a blog up and expecting, business to come your way is a little bit tough. One thing I've been loving lately, and I'm not the only one, is podcasting. For a couple reasons. One, it's the technology to listen to it is better. It's having a bit of a renaissance and an explosion right now. But beyond that, it's a really great tool for using your resources effectively. So, for example, let's pretend that you have a interview-based podcast where you have a business that is about, let's say you're a business consultant and you're about helping businesses find solutions to their problems. So you create a podcast where you interview a bunch of smart business people and you ask wise questions. Now, what does that do? The first thing is you can do all of your podcasting for a month in about 2 days a month. And those people are creating the content for you. So instead of having to write a bunch of blog posts, you come up with some questions, have a conversation, get it edited, and you've got podcasts for the month. And those people are happy to do it. So you're getting them to do the work for you, and they're thrilled, right? Look, you're getting me to talk for an hour, and I'm so happy. So it's the same kind of thing, right? The other thing is that I think is even in some ways more relevant is that everyone talks about trying to build an audience. Like if I can get an audience of 100,000 people and sell 1% of them, I'll be, I have a business model. Well, the thing is, building an audience of 100,000 people is really difficult. And who are those people? I mean, let's say you're selling, it's one thing if you're selling Chia Pets, but if you're selling a $10,000 piece of software, are there really that many people in your audience who can buy that? But let's say instead you build an audience that's just big enough, and it's of the right kinds of people. And then let's say you invite people that you would never have access to if you didn't have a podcast to be on your show. Then you get them on your show, and now they have exposure, they have an audience, and it's a lot easier to say, hey, let's go get a cup of coffee, let's have a conversation, let's see where there are strategic partnerships. So instead of networking with your local BNI group, which leads to business, you're networking with movers. So, and we all know we are the power of our network. I mean, the people who, the real deals get done, rich and powerful people hang out together on purpose. But you can make that happen for yourself. It happens on the other side of the microphone, the other side of the keyboard. It's not all about building a massive audience anymore. It can be about forming strategic relationships by using media. Does that make sense? I mean, there's a lot in that.
Yeah, that makes sense. So with content marketing, what are the biggest misconceptions about it?
I mean, I think one is this idea that if you just blog a bunch, somehow that's going to bring you business. Like the magical Google fairies will just say, we're giving you brownie points for blogging. We're going to put you number one on the search engine for all the key terms, and not only that, business is going to fall into your lap. And to read some of the articles, it almost feels that way. Just make sure you're constantly producing content. Well, everyone else is reading the same articles as you are, so they're doing it too. What if your articles are irrelevant or not very good, or no one wants to read them because the headlines aren't right, or they ramble on for 3 paragraphs before getting to the point? And then even if you have great articles or even podcast episodes, how are they getting into the world? Just tweeting them out? Who are you tweeting them to? And, so this whole, if you build it, they will come. Google is not this magical machine that finds stuff and just brings it to the attention of the world. You need a strategy. You need really compelling content, but beyond that, you need to be building relationships with the kind of people who are connectors, who can share your stuff widely and who can make things happen for you. And there's ways to do that, but it's not as simple as, we can talk about that, but it's not as simple as just jam out a bunch of content and that's going to make you rich,
So I was reading on your company website one of the testimonials, and it was from the CEO of Interneer, and he said that you asked the hard questions. And it's like, what are those questions that you asked your clients like before you really begin to create their strategy?
Yeah, it's a good question as well. I mean, something I say to a lot of my clients, and a lot of time, I always like to say the foundation is important. You can have a great content strategy, but if, for example, if your website is set up in such a way that Google can't find it because of the architecture, or if the copy is really weak, the rest of it won't matter because you won't be able to make a sale, right? So essentially, I will walk them through that process, and the kinds of questions I ask, I always say to them, I say, listen, I am going to play the role as the adversary, because when somebody is reading your material, especially your sales copy, they don't want to hear about how wonderful they are. They have a bunch of unspoken questions. And my goal is to draw those out. So someone might say, I might say to someone, our software is the best business process management software ever. Why do I need a business process management software? Because it'll help keep you organized. Well, I keep organized with a book. Won't this just be more confusing? And I make them convince me until we get to the nugget of what it is that they're really selling. Because people aren't buying business process management software, right? I mean, they're buying a solution to what gives them pain, or something to make their life better. So I really work hard to try to get at that. I think that's what he meant, if I know who you're talking about.
No, yeah, that is exactly what I meant. So the questions you ask are to help, I guess, the companies have a clear view of exactly what it is they're selling beyond just their product, like what needs are they meeting of their target audience, and like how are they fulfilling those needs, and trying to communicate that. It seems like that's what you said. So I have a Twitter question.
Sure.
And it is from John Ortega. And he says, does content casting take up all of your work time now?
Yes and no. And no. I mean, I would say the vast majority of what we do falls under the content casting umbrella, because that's really our name for what ends up enveloping the whole strategic plan. I mean, we're creating an entire system from beginning to end to implementation that will allow you to drive your business goals. So in that sense, yes, but that takes many forms.
What kind of forms does that take?
So to give you an example, I mean, our process is usually the same, and we have 5 steps. We go through them and then we implement. But I always say, sell people what they want to buy, not what you want to sell them, right? So we had a new client, or have a new client, that originally came to me because they heard about content casting and the content strategy, piece. But after asking them a lot of questions, I eventually had to say to them, look, I don't think you need content casting. You have a really good strategy team already. They were a company that had a strong marketing department. And what I got to was they just needed content. I mean, they had all the mechanisms in place. They didn't need that from us. Most companies don't. They did. But they didn't have internal writers. They didn't have, and the writers they did have were young and didn't really know how to sell and whatever it was. And they didn't have anyone to write who understood strategy. So we did a deal to create a certain number of ebooks because we're really good at that. And it was a package deal, and that was the piece we handled, and that's at a different price, and it's a different package. Would have I liked to have sold her the full content casting package from a selfish point of view? Sure, it's a big ticket thing, but that wasn't right for them, and we can do the other stuff, so we did it.
Yeah. So earlier you were talking about the
Wait, I'm
importance.
sorry, you're cutting out.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, so earlier you were talking about the importance of building a network. So what kind of tips would you have for someone who hasn't really started doing that yet? Like how could they begin to build their network?
It depends. I mean, it really, I would say that you should first figure out why you're building a network. I mean, a lot of times I see people just do the standard stuff because they think that's what they should do. And I think some of that standard stuff exists for a reason because it works. So, I mean, meeting people one on one for coffee and this and that, yeah, sure, good stuff. But this whole thing of like going to networking cocktail events and going to local networking groups and all of this and just handing out business cards and sending out 10 introductions as if it were a formula thing. I don't think that's that quid pro quo approach. You do some for me and I'll do for you. I don't think that's what the people with truly strong personal networks have. I mean, I think that the goal is to be the person who, whenever you call, people are happy to hear from you. People are rooting for you. And I think the way to do that is to be genuinely helpful. Now, it's a function of you only have so much time, so who are you going to be helpful to? So BNI, my wife is a makeup artist. I have a lot of respect for makeup artists. I think they're talented, wonderful people. That being said, I don't have much of a reason to form relationships from a professional level with chiropractors and makeup artists, and that's what BNI has a lot of. Are you still there, by the way? It's totally frozen. Hello? Hmm.
Hello.
Oh,
Hi.
hey, I can't see you. I just see the Vidpal logo. Oh,
Okay.
there you are. Technical difficulties.
Yes, technical difficulties. Thank you, everyone, for staying live with us. And so I think we both froze, and I got cut off, and so I didn't hear everything you were saying. Would you be able
Oh,
to
I don't
continue from where we
remember.
left off?
I don't
Okay.
know what I was saying. Something
Okay.
about
So
building a network, maybe. Well, I was
yeah.
just. I think it's important to really target the type of people you want to meet. I mean, if you're if you're selling a $50,000 product, should you be in networking groups and dedicating a lot of time and energy to schmoozing with makeup artists and chiropractors? And I love makeup artists and chiropractors. My wife is a makeup artist, and I think they're fantastic. But is that the kind of network that's going to refer $50,000, $100,000 leads to you? I don't know. I mean, you have to make that decision. It wasn't for me,
Hmm.
so I focus on, and I use media. I mean, like I said, what I do is instead of just introducing people, which I do plenty of, I interview people on our blog and give them the exposure. Especially if I find out they have a book release coming or a new product, I'll say, hey, why don't you come on my blog? And I'm starting my own, podcast soon, and I'll do the same there. And that's giving someone something that's really a lot more valuable than, I don't know, having passing out your business card to them and whatever else the networking books teach. So I found that to be very effective.
Yeah, that sounds like a smart choice. Because I know whenever I do go to networking places and I do hand out my business card and I get people's business cards, very few people will I then go to kind of renew that connection or call
Sorry,
to
Emily,
kind of
I'm
get
not
a.
I'm not hearing you. What was that?
I was saying when I go to networking events, there's a small number of people will after I get their business card that'll actually reach out to connect with. I
Yeah,
think of that kind of like that busy mind frame of like, oh, what time is there just to really nurture all of these connections. So I like how I just really like that idea of using interviewing and podcasting and that stuff to build those connections. And like you said, you're giving someone value back in return, and it's kind of like a mutual exchange.
yeah, yeah. Everyone benefits in that case because you get your content and they get exposure, and it's a nice conversation, and a bond forms, and leads
Yeah.
to some nice things. And then you get to demonstrate that you're smart too, if you are smart. And I'm sure everyone listening is smart. So
Hmm. So we have another Twitter question, and this one is also from John Ortega, and it is about travel. What's your favorite travel spot in the whole world that you'll always go back to one day?
my favorite travel spot.
Uh-huh.
Um, well, I got the opportunity about 10 years ago. I got obsessed with Iceland. I don't know why. I must have read an article, and it just seemed really cool to me and weird. And for years I wanted to go there, and I just never had the opportunity. And for this past birthday, I found out my wife planned a surprise trip to Iceland this summer. And I found out about it before my birthday, and that was good because I could get my life in order before we left, my work stuff. And we went, and it was every bit as great as I thought it would be. It was just the coolest, most charming, most beautiful, most artistic place I've been. The food was good. The people are great. Great. So I'd go back there. I loved it. I was sorry to leave. It was really cool. The weather is not fantastic, but that is kind of cool in its own way. And you start every day by going to a what they call hot pots. They're these geothermal pools that everyone goes to in the morning. It's really fun. It's really nice. We hiked the glacier. Saw some live music. You know, went to a place with 26 waterfalls. It was really great.
What was the landscape like?
Oh, just like another planet. I mean, it was. There aren't a lot of trees there. Volcanic island, and it's a young island, geologically. But so you'll have there are just these. I mean, there are these places, these really green places with waterfalls where there's a rainbow all the time because of the way the mist is. There's just a constant rainbow. Mountains, the weather will change. It'll be like 20 degrees, and then like 70 degrees within 2 hours. The sky is really kind of weird looking. It's like low and big with these big clouds. Sometimes steam is coming out of the ground. It's a really weird, cool landscape, you know. There are glaciers in some places.
It reminds me a little bit of I guess what did it say, like a Tim Burton kind of style, like the steam coming out of the ground and kind of those little quirks.
Yeah, there was some of that. It was weird like that. And you know, I'm a writer, and it's a very literary country. It's some I don't know, like 1 out of 10 people writes fiction, and some people think, you know, their language is like pure Norse. It's what the Vikings spoke. But the Vikings brought their Irish slaves to Iceland when they went there, so they're about half Celtic. So people think that their literary culture comes from the Irish side, and they wrote the sagas, which everything we know about Norse mythology and the legends are from their sagas. So that's another cool element that I really like being a writer. So I want to go back there. I don't know. There are other places I want to go first. I want to go to Argentina, which I've never been to, but I got to get back to Iceland.
Why is it that you want to go to Argentina?
I guess a couple reasons. I mean, I've never been to South America, but it seems like a different sort of South America. It's like, from what I understand, Buenos Aires is this weird mix between old Europe and South America. Also, this is a nerdy thing, but I really like, again, writing. There's this writer, Borges, who I really like a lot, and his stuff is always in Buenos Aires, and it seems cool to me, so I think that'd be cool. I like steak a lot, and I really want to try their steak. I hear it's the best in the world. And my wife has a very good friend who lives there, too.
So we have another Twitter question. This one is from Jamie Gonzalez. Can you ask Michael what will...
Wait, you're freezing up a little again. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's cool. Can you hear me clear now?
Yeah.
So this question is from Jamie Gonzalez. Can you ask Michael what will be the best way to find the right audience for your product and content?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really broad question. I think you need to start by figuring out, you know, what, I don't think that starts with the internet. I mean, I think that starts by assessing your company and asking questions to real people. So, and it's always a hypothesis. That's the other thing. You don't always know. I mean, YouTube was originally a dating site, and the technology that powered, they were going to do a video dating thing, and they created a platform, and the dating thing bombed, but the engine behind it was great. So, I mean, everything is a campaign. So, I mean, at some point, you need to ask people, you need to use your educated guesses, and then you need to put it out into the world and test, look at your numbers. But once you do decide on what that hypothetical market is, I think there are ways to figure out who the influencers are. So there's usually between 15 and 30 blogs or podcasts or online influencers who mean anything in any niche. There might be 10,000, but there's always this little core, and I'm not exaggerating. They link to each other, they talk about each other. So once you do find that audience, you want to be courting those people, not the millions of other bloggers and podcasters out there. But yeah, I think you do it the way you would do it for any business. But the good thing about the internet is that you can actually put it out into the world and get real numbers very quickly, which you couldn't do before.
So a writing question. So you write for Inc. magazine, and then you do article and blog writing and landing pages and content for websites. And then you also said you write fiction?
Yeah, I do. It's funny. I mean, I like to write fiction. I spend a little time early in the morning doing it. Lately, I've been working on this theater thing with my fiction writing time. Yeah, I do. I do.
What's your favorite type of writing amongst all the different genres?
Like my favorite type of fiction writing?
Or I guess not genre, but just different type of writing. Like, do you enjoy fiction more than blogging or more than, website content?
Yeah, I mean, the fiction is my play. You know what I mean? I mean, that's
Uh-huh.
fun. That's like making up stories. So, in terms of more enjoyment, sure. I mean, writing copy and writing blog posts are part of a bigger picture. It's part of building my business, which I love doing. I love building my business, web copy with my free time. You know what I mean? Uh,
Yeah.
but fiction is like playing guitar. It's just fun. So, but I love building my business. I love all the activities that go into my business. But there are days where you're like, you know what? I just sort of don't feel like writing this web copy right now or this article, but there's a business reason behind it.
And then I read one of your blog posts about punk rock and how a tie of you saw how entrepreneurs who have like a history or background or enjoyment of punk rock, how that kind of has like an extra, I know, edge to their work. So how has punk rock influenced your work?
It's really, I'm very biased because that's the music that as a kid meant the most to me. And I still like it a lot. Um, that being said, when punk came out and when it was in its heyday, I think people really thought the people who listened to it were real scumbags. I mean, it was, seeing surface level of loudness and violence and whatever. But it turns out I think it was really music for the kids who didn't fit in and who were dreamers and kind of weird, and a lot of it's very creative, a lot of it's funny. I mean, a lot of it's odd, and you had to be a little bit, you know, I don't know, different than the run of the mill to be into it. That being said, there's a lot of people who, it's like kid mohawk for trying to be different, and they all are dressed with the same, patches and chains and whatever. But I think that how has it influenced me? I just think that idea of obviously the do-it-yourself thing. I mean, there were a lot of bands who they couldn't get on a major label, so instead of complaining about that and giving up, they created their own zines, fanzines, and even record labels, and they made it happen. They built networks before there really were networks. I think that was an influence. I think um, just the idea of shaking people up. I mean, I think it's true in business just like it's true in art, that the kind of stuff that appeals to me draws a line in the sand and sort of makes people open their eyes a little bit. And I don't know. Again, this is probably just a bias, but I sometimes find that even though people thought it was so offensive when it came out, a lot of the people who grew up on punk rock are just interesting people. And maybe that's because they were the weirdos, and weirdos tend to do cool things, But I've just noticed that. Again, I'm biased because I really like that scene.
That was great. Yeah. I think there's like a lot of different sub communities. We're kind of like the outcasts or and like they have this for me personally as well, there's like this like little eccentricity or just like this little unique thing that like later in life becomes kind of like a flourishing point or
Yeah,
something just to kind of help I don't know, I guess the edge I was talking about earlier to create that or to manifest more later in life.
yeah. I mean, and just from a side note, I mean, has nothing really to do with business, but I kind of hope, I think punk's gotten a little bit cute. Like I think now it's not, while I love that music, I feel like the moment's passed a little bit. I feel like I'm sort of looking at like how they had in the '70s that band or the '60s that band Sha Na Na that did like the doo wop stuff. I feel like it's a little like that. It's like a tribute act now, that with in 2015 playing guitar like it's 1977. I think it's time for a new scene. But it was fun while it lasted.
Yeah. So before we finish, is there anything else that you'd like to add or say?
Um, no, I mean, other than the fact that, to be shameless, it'd be nice if people could know how to reach me if they wanted to talk to me. But other than that, it's been a great conversation.
So how can people reach you if they want to connect with you or talk to you about working with you?
Yeah, so our website, is still shinecommunications.com. It's SCHEIN communications.com. My email address is mshine, spelled that way, at shinecommunications.com. Or you can always tweet me at Michael Schein1. And
Okay,
Schein is
cool.
spelled in that wacky way. SCHEIN.
So I will have your Twitter and your email and your website linked to this video that you're watching on YouTube. And you can also find that on the blog post on our blog, vidpal.net. And thank you, Michael, for taking the time with us and for having this conversation with us.
Thank you, Emily. It was a real pleasure. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you. So everyone watching, once again, this is Vidpal, and this is part of our weekly startup and travel webinar series, and we will see you next week. Bye.